In many ways, their story asks us a question that echoes across time. If you'd been living in New York in 1850, would you have had the courage to do what they did? Would you have opened your home? Would you have risked your reputation? Would you have put your family at risk? It's easy to say yes from our position of comfort today, looking back at history. But the truth is, most of us probably would have looked the other way. Most of us would have rationalized it. Most of us would have found reasons why it wasn't our responsibility. And yet these people didn't. In a city built on profit, on commerce, on the pursuit of money, they chose something else. They chose principle. They chose humanity. And they did it quietly, without expecting recognition, without expecting to be remembered, without expecting anything but the knowledge that they'd done the right thing. The legacy of the Underground Railroad in New York isn't just that it helped people escape slavery. It's bigger than that. It's a reminder that change doesn't always come from the top down. It doesn't always come from famous leaders making grand speeches. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people making quiet choices. Sometimes it comes from small networks of dedicated individuals working in secret. Sometimes the most powerful force for change is not a movement, but a choice. A choice made by a single person, in a single moment, to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And so when you think about New York, when you think about that city of ambition and dreams, remember this. Beneath the bustling streets, in the quiet rooms and hidden passages, there was once a network of human beings who believed that freedom was more important than law, that humanity was more important than profit, and that the life of another person was worth the risk. They didn't leave behind monuments or memorials. They left behind something far more valuable. They left behind the proof that resistance is possible, that change is possible, that even in the darkest times, there are people willing to light a candle rather than curse the darkness. Their story reminds us that history is not inevitable. It's not predetermined. It's made by choices, by people, by small acts of courage that compound into something larger. And if we remember nothing else from this chapter of American history, we should remember this: that ordinary people have always had the power to change the world. They just have to be willing to use it. But they did it. They raised it. And James Hamlet walked free. The story got out. It was printed in newspapers. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. It sparked a larger conversation about slavery in New York. It made people think. It forced the city to confront something it had been avoiding. It showed that even in the face of the Fugitive Slave Act, there were people willing to do the impossible. But for every James Hamlet, there were many more whose names we'll never know. People who made it to freedom through the network. People who lived quiet lives, who raised families, who became part of the fabric of New York. Their stories are mostly lost now, buried in old documents and newspaper archives that nobody reads anymore. What's remarkable about this network is how it survived for so long despite the odds. It survived because the people involved understood something crucial, that the system was only as strong as its secrecy. They didn't make grand pronouncements. They didn't organize public demonstrations. They worked quietly, efficiently, carefully. They knew their risks. Many of them faced arrest, prosecution, and social ostracism. Some were convicted of violating the Fugitive Slave Act. Some lost their businesses. Some became outcasts in their own communities. But they kept going. There was a pastor named Theodore Parker in Boston, not New York, but he was connected to the network, and he said something that captures the spirit of what these people were doing. He said that he was willing to go to hell for his principles. That's what we're talking about here. People who had so much to lose, who were so comfortable in their positions of relative privilege, and yet they chose to risk it all because they believed slavery was wrong. The story of the Underground Railroad in New York isn't a story about heroes, at least not in the traditional sense. It's not a story about famous abolitionists who gave speeches or wrote famous books. It's a story about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. It's about a dock worker deciding to help someone escape, even though it could cost him his job. It's about a landlord choosing to rent a room to a fugitive slave, even though it could land him in prison. It's about a mother in Brooklyn deciding to teach the children of escaped slaves, even though society told her it was wrong. And here's what really gets me about this part of history. We've almost completely forgotten about it. The textbooks skip over it. The documentaries don't talk about it. Even New Yorkers today walk past the buildings where this was happening, walk past the sites where people were being sheltered, walk past the locations where the network was operating, and they have no idea. They have no idea that their city, which they might think of as having always been progressive, was actually struggling with these moral questions, was actually deeply complicit in slavery, but also contained within itself this powerful, quiet resistance. The network finally collapsed, though it didn't happen all at once. It slowly weakened as the Civil War approached. Some people left to participate in the war directly. The political climate changed. The need became less acute as society was forced to confront slavery directly. By the time the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, the network had essentially dissolved. The work was done. The country had finally caught up to what these ordinary New Yorkers had already understood, that slavery was an abomination that had to end. But what's so important to remember is that these people didn't wait for society to change. They didn't wait for laws to catch up. They didn't wait for public opinion to shift. They acted. They took risks. They believed that what was right was more important than what was legal. And because of that, because of their choices, hundreds of people got their freedom. Hundreds of lives were saved. Hundreds of families were reunited. Hundreds of people got to build new lives in the North. If you go to New York today, you can still visit some of these places. You can walk past where Thomas Downing's Oyster House used to be. You can see the churches that were part of the network. You can find the documents in archives, the old newspaper articles that mention these events, the property records that show who owned which buildings. But unless you know what you're looking for, you'll walk right past them. They don't have plaques. They don't have monuments. They're not in the guidebooks. And maybe that's fitting. Maybe it's fitting that these people, who wanted nothing more than to do what they believed was right without fanfare or attention, are largely forgotten. But it's also a loss, because their story teaches us something vital about the power of individual choice, about the possibility of resistance even in the darkest times, about the courage required to stand against the tide of what society accepts as normal. If you've ever heard of him, you'd be surprised. Because by all accounts, Thomas Downing was an oyster man. An oyster, that's what he was known for in New York. He ran one of the most popular oyster houses in the city, located at 5 Broad Street, right in the financial district. Can you imagine? In the heart of Wall Street, where the men who made money from slavery conducted their business, there was an oyster restaurant run by a free black man. And it was here, at this unassuming oyster house, that one of the most important networks of the Underground Railroad operated. Downing's place wasn't just a restaurant. It was a hub. Merchants, lawyers, businessmen came through those doors every day. Conversations happened. Information was shared. People who opposed slavery got to know each other. They formed connections. They learned who could be trusted. And most importantly, they figured out how to help people escape. But Downing himself was just one part of a much larger ecosystem. Around him, woven through the city like invisible threads, were dozens of other people. There was Horace Greeley, the powerful newspaper editor, who used his publication to advocate against slavery while also helping fugitives behind the scenes. There were German and Irish immigrants who, despite facing their own discrimination, opened their homes to people fleeing slavery. There were businessmen who allowed their properties to be used as safe houses. There were servants and maids who provided shelter in the basements and back rooms of the very buildings where slavery's profits were being counted. And then there were the churches. Some New York churches became the backbone of the resistance. Ministers preached against slavery from their pulpits, and then they helped facilitate escapes in the very building where they preached. It was a dangerous double life. One wrong move, one suspicious visitor, and everything would collapse. Everything. The system worked like this. An enslaved person would somehow arrive in New York. Sometimes they'd stowed away on ships. Sometimes they'd escaped with help. Sometimes they'd been smuggled north. As soon as they arrived, if they could get to the right people, they'd be moved quickly. The network understood that every hour was crucial. The longer someone stayed in one place, the more likely a slave catcher would find them. So the flow had to be constant, rapid, and completely secret. They'd be given shelter for just 1 or 2 nights. During that time, the network would arrange the next stage of the journey. Money would be raised for passage north. Sometimes they'd be sent to Canada, sometimes to other safe states. Sometimes they'd simply disappear into the city itself, given new names, new identities, and absorbed into the Black community in Brooklyn or Manhattan. Many of these people became merchants themselves, became citizens, became woven into the fabric of the city that had saved them. But the danger was ever present. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 changed everything, and not for the better. This law was catastrophic. It meant that federal marshals would actively hunt down escaped slaves. It meant that accused enslaved people had almost no legal protection. It meant that even being accused of being a fugitive could get you arrested, and the burden of proof that you weren't enslaved fell on you. In a city where racism was endemic, where many people saw nothing wrong with slavery, this was a nightmare scenario. And yet, somehow, the network adapted. It became more careful, more secretive, more defiant. Because what you have to understand is that this wasn't a network driven by politics or ideology alone. These were people driven by something simpler and far more powerful. They believed that keeping another human being in slavery was wrong. And that conviction, in the face of legal opposition and social hostility, took an extraordinary kind of courage. Let me tell you about one specific journey, because it illustrates just how dangerous and complicated this whole system was. In 1854, a man named James Hamlet, who had escaped slavery in Maryland, was living quietly in New York. He was making a living. He was building a life. He thought he was safe. But then one day, he was arrested. He was accused of being a fugitive slave. And the system moved fast. Too fast. Within days, he was being processed to be sent back to his enslaver. Now, here's what happened next. The network mobilized. Not openly. That would have been impossible. But quietly, with incredible coordination. Money was raised. Legal advocates were contacted. Public pressure was applied. Within just a few days, the network managed to do something almost unprecedented. They gathered enough money to purchase James Hamlet's freedom. Yes, you heard that right. They had to literally buy his freedom. They had to buy a human being to prevent him from being enslaved again. $1,000. That was an enormous sum at the time. Imagine you're walking through the streets of New York City in 1852. Gas lamps flicker against the darkness. The cobblestones echo with the sound of horse-drawn carriages. Merchants are closing their shops. And somewhere in this bustling metropolis, in the shadows of America's most celebrated city of freedom, there's a knock on a hidden door. A quiet knock. A desperate knock. A knock that could mean the difference between captivity and liberty. What if I told you that New York City, the beacon of American promise, was also the center of one of history's most dangerous secret networks? Not what you'd expect, right? We've all heard the stories about the Underground Railroad. We've learned about Harriet Tubman, about the safe houses scattered across the North. But there's a chapter of history that rarely gets told, a chapter that happens in plain sight, right in the heart of the city that never slept. A network so hidden, so intricate, that most New Yorkers today have no idea it existed beneath their feet. This is the story of how a city built on commerce and ambition became an unlikely sanctuary. This is the story of ordinary people who risked everything. And this is the story that changes everything you thought you knew about slavery in the North. Let me take you back to 1840. New York City is thriving. It's the commercial heart of America. Money flows through Manhattan like water through the Hudson River. Millionaires walk these streets. Ships arrive daily from around the world carrying goods, people, and secrets. On the surface, it's a northern city, a free city, a city where slavery shouldn't exist. But beneath this gleaming facade lies something far more complicated. Something darker. Something that most New Yorkers, even many historians, never talk about. You see, slavery wasn't just a Southern problem. This is the part they skip in most textbooks. New York was complicit. New York was intertwined with it. The wealth that built those magnificent brownstones in Brooklyn, The money that funded the grand hotels, the capital that made merchants and industrialists rich, much of it came directly from the slave trade. New York's ports were the epicenter of the slave trade's logistics. The ships that brought enslaved people from Africa often docked right here. The merchants who sold them made their fortunes here. The insurance companies that insured those human beings were headquartered right in Lower Manhattan. But here's where our story gets interesting. Here's where it becomes something unexpected. Despite this connection to slavery, despite the fact that slavery had actually been legal in New York until 1827. Yes, you heard that right. Only 25 years before our story begins, a resistance movement was quietly taking root. And it wasn't just abolitionists preaching from pulpits. It wasn't just Quakers writing pamphlets. It was ordinary people, dock workers, shop owners, servants, people who understood one simple thing, that human beings shouldn't be treated as property. Now, you have to understand something crucial to appreciate what happens next. New York in the 1840s and 50s wasn't a welcoming place for escaped, enslaved people. This might shock you, but the North was terrifyingly hostile. The Fugitive Slave Acts, laws passed in 1793 and then made even worse in 1850, meant that any enslaved person, no matter where they were, could be hunted down, captured, and sent back south to slavery. And that's not all. New York had become a hotbed of what was called slave catching. Men who made their living dragging escaped slaves back to their enslavers roamed the streets. They had networks. They had money. They had legal authority on their side. So imagine you're an enslaved person who's just arrived in New York after an agonizing journey. You've already risked your life getting this far. You've already defied everything. And now you're in the city itself, but you're surrounded by danger. You can't go to the police. Many of them were in league with slave catchers. You can't trust most people you meet. You don't know who will report you. You don't know whose door to knock on. This is where the secret network comes in. There were men and women in New York, a small but dedicated group, who maintained what historians now call the Underground Railroad. Though honestly, it was nothing like the organized railroad system you might imagine. It was more fragile than that, more dangerous, more remarkable. These weren't famous people. You'd walk past them on the street and see nothing special, but they were connected by something powerful, by conviction, by faith, by a fundamental belief that slavery was wrong and that helping people escape was right, no matter the cost. One of the most critical figures in this story was a man named Thomas Downey.